So this morning, we're talking about navigating life's transitions. And let me just say up front that what I'm going to do this morning is give a bird's eye view of transition. To really look, and with my intention is that in the months to come, to revisit this whole area of transitions, but do it in more of a workshop or a small group kind of environment, because this really requires a conversation between those of us that are going through transitions, because it's not paint by numbers kind of thing. It's not, black and white. There's a lot of nuances when it comes to learning how to transition, learning how to navigate through your transitions. And one of the things I hope you discover this morning is that if you are in transition, you are not crazy. And really, you are in a good place. Because when God moves us into transitions, He's moving us into a good place, but sometimes the journey itself is extremely painful. So looking at life itself is a series of changes. Your relationship with others will change, your work will change, your careers will change. Your life stages is a series of changes. Your environment will change, your body will change. Anybody notice that? Your energy level will change. Your identity will change, your spiritual life will change, your emotional, psychological, intellectual, whatever you're at, that all changes. But some of these changes will involve what I call transitions. And let me just take a couple moments to define what I mean by change and what I mean by transition. Change is simply the old you in a new circumstance. It's the old you in a new house. You change houses. It's the old you in a new job. It's the old you in a new relationship. It's the old you in a new church. And what change does, it focuses on the external modifications that we make in our lives. So life is a series of changes. And some of these changes only require we take who we are now and just move who we are now into a new situation, into a new job, into a new house, into a new neighborhood. Transitions also involve change, but the difference is that transition involves an inner shift. Sometimes it's very subtle, like an attitude or an expectation. Other times this shift can be very drastic, like moving from being a teenager to a young adult. That's a transition. You think different, you process different. Ideally, by the time you're in your 20s, you are a different person than you were when you were 14. If you're not, pray for the parents of those people. So transition involves an inner shift, and as I said, sometimes these shifts are very subtle. It's like taking your car to the mechanic and you just simply get an oil change. They take out the old oil filter, they put in a new one, and you're on the road. But other times you take your car to the mechanic and you think you're going in for an oil change, but he's wanting to get you a new transmission. He's wanting to put your engine on the block and dismantle it and take it apart. So when we talk about transition, sometimes they can be really simple, or other times they can be extremely complicated. Transitions are about that psychological and that spiritual reorientation and redefinition that goes along with the exterior change. So when we talk about transition, the focus is on inner processes. Many times during transitions, it will involve us getting to know God and ourselves in a different way. Transitions have many names. Growing up and becoming an adult, that's a transition. Moving out of the house, that's a transition. Settling down, standing on your own 2 feet, falling apart, midlife crisis, dark night of the soul, the wilderness, the desert, crisis of faith, nervous breakdown. Those are all names we have for transitions in different seasons and different times of our life. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to root this sermon on transitions in the 23rd Psalm, because I think the 23rd Psalm can speak to us as we are in transition. So if we can throw that scripture up there, 23rd Psalm, and we will read it together, and then we're going to really land on verse 4 and talk about that a little bit. So let's read this together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me, presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy me the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Amen. Thank you. You know, David, he opens up this psalm, and he describes Jesus, the Good Shepherd, as, he's someone that helps me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He's restoring my soul. He's guiding me on paths of righteousness. Yet at verse 4, he says this, yes, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Now, in verse 4, I'm not sure everything that David had in mind when he wrote this verse, but it does describe transition fairly accurately. And there's a number of words I want to pull out of this verse. He starts off by saying, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Walking is a forward movement. If you're in transition, you're moving away from something and you're moving towards something. Transition always involves movement. And, he doesn't say, I run through the valley of the shadow of death. And he doesn't say, I live in the valley of the shadow of death. He doesn't say, I crawl through the valley of the shadow of death. What he says is that even though I walk through. So transition always involves forward movement. You're moving away from something and you're moving towards something. That phrase, the valley of the shadow, the valley of the shadow of death. So transition, especially the middle part of transition, can be a dark place. And it can be a dangerous place. Again, the church history gives us words like the dark night of the soul. It's at a place where things aren't really clear, where you don't have a clear sense of how to move forward. And so the transition is a valley of the shadow of death, and then even the word death. And death involves loss, death involves grieving. Then the words fear, evil, rod and staff. As you're going through transition, there is a need for protection. And many times there is a need for guidance, because transition puts you in a very vulnerable place. And then you see the word comfort there. What precedes comfort? When do you need comfort? After you suffered. You need comfort when you've experienced pain. So what David is implying here is that, yes, we knew Jesus as a good shepherd. There's these green pastures and still water. So far, so good. Paths of righteousness. So far, so good. Restoring my soul. Oh, this is awesome. I just knew, Christianity was the way to go. And then in verse 4, all at once he's talking about comforting you. And he's talking about death. He's talking about darkness. He's talking about shadow. He's talking about evil. And he's talking about us being in a very vulnerable place. And so after you experience loss and suffering, that's when you need comfort. And so God promises to be with us. And so transition is a place to encounter God in a deeper way. And it's also a place to encounter ourselves. The only way to be disillusioned is to have illusion in the first place. And so what transition does, it moves us from an old reality that was somewhat wrapped in illusion. Because our past is never as good as we say it is. But it's that illusion sometimes keeps us at places where that heeds our growth and our maturity. So this transition and disillusionment is really one of the signs that you're probably on the front end of transition. It doesn't mean you may be disillusioned with your kids. It doesn't mean you get rid of your kids. It just means there's something that has to go on inside of you. There's an inner shift that you need to make if you're going to be able to continue the journey with your family. But transition leads to a good place. And you don't need to put the scripture up there, but after he says we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, and we don't have to fear evil, and there's comfort for us. And then in verse 5 he says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So transitions lead us to a good place. The journey may suck, but the destination is worth it. And so transition, and as God is transitioning us, he's transitioning us to a healthier place, to a better place, to a good place. But the journey itself is marked with difficulties. So not all transitions are the same. Not all transitions are equal. Not all transitions are equal in intensity, in duration, or effect. So some transitions is like getting the oil change. You go in, something needs to be tweaked, there's an attitude that needs to be adjusted, there's an expectation, God needs to kind of pull it down a little bit, so there's an adjustment, and it's not a major adjustment, but there is an adjustment. But other times, the transition, as I said before, it's like, you think you need an oil change, but what you really need is a new transmission. And so there's this sense where God really disassembles you, and then he puts you back together. So not all transitions are equal in duration. Some transitions last for months. Other transitions last for years. And not all transitions are equal in their effect. For sometimes we go through transitions and not much on the outside seems to change. Yet there's other transitions we go through where everything has changed. Where it's a new marriage, it's a new kind of you. And it not only affects you, transitions not only affects you, but it affects those within your circle. It affects those that are the closest to you. My wife Diana, she grew up the oldest girl of 9 children. And so there was a sense that from day one, she was raising her younger brothers and sisters. Her mom was ill during much of that time. And so, she just became a responsible human being from, a little girl on up. And in fact, it's interesting because, when she left, after she left home, she was worked at in ICU as a nurse's aide, but they thought she was a nurse because she was just so responsible. It was about a year after. When you're not a registered nurse, but you've been doing all this stuff, and so, she knows how to take care of people. And then, with our 6 children, so she moved from, 9 kids, raising a family, and then raising our 6 kids. And I remember that, so it was always about caring for other people. And when she came to a place where she needed to learn how to care for herself and practice self-care, our children still at home, they were asking, who stole our mom? There was this woman that took care of us and all of that. Who took her away? Replaced her with this other woman. So what happens in change and transitions is that it affects us, not only the person that's going through transition, but those who are closest to us. But all transitions have a three-phase flow. So as you look at the anatomy of a transition, there's three parts to every transition. There's an ending, there's a middle part, and then there's a new beginning. First of all, there's an ending where you have to let go of an old thing in order to lay hold of a new thing. Transitions always begin with an ending. There is a loss. There is something you have to let go in order to transition and lay hold of the new thing. The middle part is marked by vulnerability, confusion, and some disorientation. The middle part is a confusing part, and I love this thing. I'm going to get it stapled to my ear the next time. So there's the middle part, and then there's the new beginning. And the ending and the middle part prepares us for the new normal. The seeds of your new beginning are sown in the darkness of the middle part. And so that middle part, that part that we want to run through, that is where God does some of the deepest work. That's where there's real fundamental changes and shifts that take place within us. So there's a sense that we need a certain kind of faith to let go. Then we need another kind of faith not to know. And I worked on this last night. And then third, we need a faith to regrow or to re-engage. And so there's three different dynamics. One is letting go of the old, grieving the loss, just the pain of death of a vision, death of a dream, death of a role. The middle part where you're really uneasy, and then coming out with a new beginning. So one of the ways that I like to describe transition is that transition is like a rope bridge with a fog patch in the middle. So it's a rope bridge with a fog patch in the middle. So on both ends, it feels really secure. But when you get right in, somewhere in the middle, you find yourself swinging in the wind in the dark. And there's a sense where you're not sure how to move forward, you're not sure where you're at, but it's, that's why they call it the dark night of the soul. There comes a point in transition, especially if it's a major transition, where you don't have a lot of clarity and you have to learn how to live with mystery. And we'll get to this in a minute. There's also that you experience emptiness because you're letting go of something, but that thing you let go of hasn't been replaced yet. So you have to somehow learn how to lean into emptiness and be satisfied with that until the Lord begins to fill it. So let's look at some endings. You know, the Bible is full of endings. In Exodus, it's a story of the nation of Israel leaving Egypt and leaving a life of slavery. And that whole story begins with an ending. It begins with them leaving Egypt. And, it's really interesting because, the beginning, the ending, you see a lot of signs and wonders. You see, blood turning into water and all this stuff. But the transition, the middle part, lasted 40 years. And, those 40 years were not wasted years, because Moses was charged not only with the task of leading the people out of Egypt, he was charged with helping change and transform the culture of a whole nation. And to me, when I look at Moses, the first part is really impressive. The 40 years that he spent changing the culture of a nation is just mind-blowing. But it started with them leaving Egypt. Genesis 2, in fact, the first 5 books in the Bible were written by Moses during the wilderness. And what Moses was doing was giving a nation that had been enslaved for centuries a new narrative, a new story, a new way to see themselves as God's chosen. So, and I think God does the same thing with businesses. He does the same thing with churches, where there's a season where he's setting the culture. And there's people that he calls to do that. Genesis 2, it says, a man shall leave his father and mother, become one. So in order for us, to have a new family relationship, we have to leave the old one. Hebrews 11, it says, by faith, Abraham, when he was called to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, he obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Jesus, you have in the Gospels where at 12 years old, he's there in Jerusalem. His parents have kind of moved on. A couple days later, they realize their kid isn't with them. Anybody ever leave their kid at a truck stop or that's scary, So, and it took 2 days for them to figure it out, I don't know. That's pretty amazing. But anyway, but when they went back and they reconnected with Jesus, I love his response. He says to his mother and father, I had to be about my father's business. So physically, Jesus stayed with his family for another 18 years. But inwardly, he already began to make the shift. He began to see himself and identity apart from his family of origin. Same thing happens with teenagers. That's what that whole adolescence is about, where our young adults are beginning to see themselves as somebody apart from just being a part of their family of origin. So in every ending involves letting go, saying goodbye to someone, to something. And with every ending, you have to surrender something of yourself. In order to gain, but as you surrender, as you let go of something of yourself, you will gain something in return, but not necessarily right away, and not necessarily what you expect. So you're letting go of something that's familiar. And that can be an identity, the way that you see yourself, your place in the world, your place in the family, dreams that you had, what you thought. I thought I'd be here when I was 30, but I'm, here. I thought in my 50s I'd be at this place, but I'm really over here. And so what happens is you let go of things that you're familiar with, things that you can't take with you into this new place that God is calling you to. But as you let go of that, it's not immediately replaced. So in letting go, you will experience emptiness. You pour out the old to make room for the new. In the Christian tradition, spiritual discipline of solitude was something to help prepare us to be empty, to be quiet. But what happens in the churches, we tend to replace secular noise with Christian noise. We replace, I thought that would get you. We replace, secular activity for Christian activity. Yeah. When what God is after is stillness. Yeah. When what God is after is that for us not to fill the emptiness that we're feeling with stuff, with noise, but learn how to rest in that emptiness and let him fill it in his time. So the first task of the ending, the first part of this transition, the first task is letting go. Jesus said, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just one grain. It never becomes more than that. But if it dies, it produces other seeds and yields a rich harvest. So there's a sense where we have to die. We have to let go. So some transitions are thrust on us, and we're not prepared for them. A divorce, a sudden death of a loved one, the loss of a job, long-term illness, a hurricane. These things are thrust on us, and we don't have time to prepare. Yet there's other transitions that are natural phases of life, like from a child to a teenager, from a teenager to a young adult. We can prepare for some transitions. If you're going to get married, that's why we do premarital counseling. Because, that person you think that's awesome, they still are awesome. But your expectations and all that will have to be adjusted if you're going to really move into having a healthy relationship. So you can prepare for some transitions, but preparation can ease a disorientation in the middle part, but it does not eliminate it. So even though you're prepared, it doesn't eliminate the emptiness, it doesn't eliminate all the disorientation. So some of the conversations you might be having in your head, if you're an internal processor and you'll be saying these things out loud, if you're an external processor, if you're on the front end of a transition that you're not really prepared for, you may say something like, what happened? Or why is this happening to me? Or, you know, if you like living in denial like I do, no biggie. Or if I try harder, if we try harder, we can avoid this. Or why is God doing this to me? Why is God requiring this of us? Or it's your fault that I'm going through this. If you were better, if you had made better decisions or whatever, we wouldn't be going through this. It's your fault. Or I didn't ask for this, or this is too much. I'm not ready for this. Or I'm really going to miss this place. I'm really going to miss this community. I'm going to miss these friends. You know, and especially those of you that have left really tight Christian church communities. You know, this middle part is a time of lamenting. It's a time of grieving because there was something taken away from you, you know, and you're experiencing loss. Or you may say something like this: I hate it, I hate it, I hate it, I hate it. So if you're saying that internally or out loud, you're probably getting ready for transition. And if you're somewhat prepared, your inner and your outer conversation may sound like this: we'll get through this. This will be another opportunity to grow, to trust God. You know, I can see the possibilities, you know, of what might be good. Here goes. Well, this has kind of worked in the past, and perhaps it'll work out again. Let's go for it. So every transition begins with an ending. And every ending involves loss, and every loss has to be grieved. Every transition begins with an ending. Every ending involves loss. Every loss has to be grieved. Let's spend a few moments talking about the middle part. As I said before, transition is like a rope bridge with a fog patch in the middle. It feels secure on both ends, because, you know, we know in a sense what we're leaving, and then as we're stepping into the new beginning, you know, the ground feels secure again. It's just that middle part that is really disconcerting. And remember that change is simply taking the old you into a new situation. But transition is something much different. Transition always involves inner formation. You're not quite sure what you're transitioning into. The middle part can be a time of dismantling and reassembling. And really it depends on what God is wanting to prepare you for in your new beginning. So there is times where God really, and I've been through this, where I felt like God just totally dismantled my inner life. And then he put it back together so that I could step into the new future that he had for me. So again, it can be that severe, or it can be something a lot more subtle, not as traumatic. The seeds of your future are sown in the dark and disorientation in the middle part. So there is something going on in your inner life that is sowing the seeds for the future that God's called you into. So the middle section is a time of lostness, is a time of emptiness, before life resumes a new pattern, a new direction. Some of the common characteristics of this middle part is you feel very disoriented. What's happening to us? What's happening to me? Did I do something wrong? Waiting. Now what? What's going on? You know, you're waiting for God to answer your prayer, to give you direction. You're feeling disruption. You know, I can't keep this up anymore. There's a search. You know, you too. Still haven't found what I'm looking for. You know, there's something that's missing. Something's not quite clicking. You feel very vulnerable. Who can I trust? I don't feel safe. I no longer feel like I'm in control. Aloneness, no one understands what happened to my friends. Emptiness, you don't know what's next. You've experienced the loss of letting go, but that hasn't been replaced with something new yet, and you don't know what it's going to look like. A sense of crisis. I don't know who or what to believe anymore, and many times there's a crisis of faith where old ways of relating to God no longer works. And so God is calling you to deepen your prayer, deepen your conversation with him. So the middle part is that space between letting go of an old identity and trying to figure out what our new one is. It's that space between your old surroundings and your new ones, your old relationships and your new relationships, your old vision and the new vision that God's called you to. Your old familiar ways and the new normal. And so in many ways, transition is like that hallway between an old room that you are living in and the new room in which you've yet to occupy. So it's that middle space. So the Bible has lots of quotes that speak of this middle part. Again, I love Hebrews 11, verse 8 says, by faith, Abraham, when he was called to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, he obeyed and went, in this next part, even though he did not know where he was going. So he left he left the place he was raised, he left the place he was the most familiar with, and he took his whole family with him. He went to a place he didn't know where he was going. He moved into transition. Job, he says this, what I feared has come upon me, what I have dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness, I have no rest, but only turmoil. That's somebody in deeply in the middle. Solomon, speaking of this transition, he says, meaningless, says the teacher, utter meaninglessness. Everything is meaningless. What does a man gain for all his labor at which he toils under the sun? Anybody ever have that feeling? What's this all for? Everything that I did, what does it really mean? Does it really count? So again, that's part of the conversations that we have when we're in the middle. This next verse here, David, and listen to how many times he says wait. He says, I wait for the Lord. My soul waits. In his word I put my hope. My soul waits for the Lord, more than watchmen wait for the morning. So David is talking about being in a place of darkness, waiting for the dawn, waiting for light to break in. And again, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, this transition, this middle part really is a place of darkness. So a couple of common responses in this middle part. One is you try to go backwards to the familiar. You're in the middle of this transition. Let's say you get a divorce, so you simply jump into another relationship. Anybody ever see that happen? And it's usually a disaster. Because it was the old you, was there when that first relationship broke up. And if you haven't worked through the transition to be another kind of person, you'll probably end up in the same kind of situation. So a lot of times we will go back to what's familiar and not do the inner work. Other times we try to sprint ahead to a new beginning. In other words, why cry over spilled milk? Let's get going. And in a sense, in our culture, we don't have a value for that mystery. We don't have a value for that in-between place. So let's just get on to the new thing. But the problem is that either returning backwards or trying to sprint to the new beginning, instead of speeding up your growth, it will slow it down. And you'll just spend longer in that middle place. So the middle part is where we do some of our most important inner work. It's where we learn to wait and trust in Jesus. We reconnect with some of our deepest longings. And it's what that middle place does, it affords us the opportunity to look at dreams that we have let go. look at maybe identities that we could have been, that we never pursued. I remember when I went through like a big transition in my 50s, I remember as a teenager wanting to be a writer, but I was such a bad speller that I thought, there's no way I could be a writer. Because back in those days, if you needed to learn how to spell a word, you had like a dictionary this thick, and then you had to sound it out. I mean, first of all, you don't know how to spell it, but then you got to try to sound it out and find it, and it was just so much work. I thought I'd never be a writer. Well, thank God for Google and all these things. But it is a time to reconnect with parts of us that we have let go because we needed to raise a family, because we needed to have a career. It's the preparation time for a new beginning. It's a time to get retooled, retrained, recalibrated. It's reconciling with unfulfilled old dreams and finding the courage to dream new dreams. And this is really painful. There's some dreams you just got to let go of. There's some visions that you had for yourself that will not come to pass. And and you have to do business with them. That involves loss. That involves grief. That involves lamenting. Because there was, you saw yourself as being married your whole life, but now you find yourself single again. You saw yourself as, your kids sitting around the table and getting along for like 2 hours. It only lasts for about 45 minutes, And so it is a letting go. It's a dying. But you can dream new dreams. And that's amazing. You can dream new dreams. You don't have to keep hanging on to the old ones. You can dream new dreams. That middle part is where you grieve your losses. It's where you learn to slow down, rest, and be still. And so let me just kind of finish up talking about the new beginnings. New beginnings begin within us. New beginnings begin within you. They don't begin out there, they begin in here. You usually get there emotionally and spiritually before you get there physically. It's that inner shift that prepares you for the new beginning. And new beginnings can be small, they can be unimpressive. It may come as a hint, an idea, an opportunity shows itself. Sometimes you just begin to picture yourself in a new role, a new identity, a new situation. A random inspiration comes and it sticks and it grows. There's what they call a convergence. It's where your talents, your spiritual gifts, your skills, your experiences, opportunities converge into an ideal role. And for sometimes it's where you find your sweet spot. And let me just tell you a secret. Your sweet spot changes over time. Just because you found it in your 20s doesn't mean it's going to be the same sweet spot in your 30s. Nobody probably ever told you that. But your sweet spot changes. And part of the transition is to prepare you for the new role, the new identity, the new place that God's called you to. So a lot of times we have to let go of our sweet spot to find the new one. A sense that things are opening up, there's new energy that comes. And new beginnings begin within us, and they may be formalized by a clear call from God to engage in a new work, a new vision of who we are, what we can do, new opportunities. But it's been my experience that a lot of times these new beginnings begin really small. And you almost don't know that you're there. But you're doing something different. There's something that shifted. And that just seemed to be an idea, something that someone said, it stuck. And you begin giving yourself to it. And before you know it, you're at a new place. And you're doing a new thing. And some of the spiritual scriptures that describe this, the psalmist said, Be at rest once more, O my soul, for the Lord has been good to you. In other words, you came through the other side. Hallelujah. I'm not swinging in the wind anymore. Psalm 16. This is great. Lord, you have assigned me my portion and my cup. You have made my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance. Again, that's working through, that's doing the inner work to come out on the other side. And Paul, he says, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. There comes a point, especially with transitions, and especially transitions in your later life, is where you embrace your limitations. That your limitations don't define you. They do shape what you can do and what you can give yourself to. But there is a sense where you do embrace your humanity. And you embrace your limitations. By the grace of God, I am what I am. So some of the conversations you can have internally or even out loud when you're in that new beginning is, praise God, we made it. You're faithful. Here goes. That was crazy. But we made it. Hope I never have to do that again. Is this real? Can I trust it? Wow. I knew this was going to turn out okay. You know, this should be interesting, this new life. So transitions, let me just close with this. And our worship team, why don't you come on up? Transitions are invitations to growth and becoming more like Jesus. And so if you find yourself at an ending, you need to ask yourself, you need to ask the Lord, what do I need to let go of? What do I need to let go of? Is it an old dream? Is it an old identity? Is it, I thought family was going to be this way, but it's that way? What do you need to let go of? If you're in the middle, it's a time to grieve your loss. It's a time to deepen your relationship with Jesus. You're not alone. You need to, if it's helpful to find a counselor, a spiritual director, a mature Christian. It's a time to process. It's a time to retool. It's the time to dream new dreams. If you're in a new beginning, congratulations. Get familiar with your new normal. It's like moving to a new town. Okay, there's the grocery store, there's the school, there's the gas station. So get familiar with your new normal. Who are your new neighbors? So through this whole process, God is with us. He's with us in the letting go. He's with us in the part where we're swinging in the wind. And He's with us in a new beginning. So let's stand. And we're going to move back into worship. And it's almost 12. My clock must be fast. If you have small children, we totally love them, but not as much as you do. So if you want to get your small kids, you can bring them back in here. But we're going to go ahead and step back into worship. And especially if you're in transition, and we just like to pray for you, that God would give you grace, that He would give you wisdom, that He would give you what you need at this moment to continue to move forward. And so I'm just going to pray that right now, and then if we have any words or whatever, we'll do that. So Father, we thank You that You are the God of not only the still waters, You're not only the God of the green pastures, You're also God of the shadows. You're the God of the dark valleys. And so, Spirit of God, we ask that You would come to us and that You would show us the things that we need to end. That You would show us what to grieve, what to let go of. That You would give us the ability to live with the emptiness, to live with the empty cup until You come and fill it. So Spirit of God, come. If you're in transition, you'd like prayer, I just want to ask that you'd come up front, and we're just going to have some people that'll pray with you. So transition is a good place to be.